everyone. This is Sofia Smallstorm. I'm doing another interview today, podcast. Not really an interview, it's going to be a discussion. The topic today is going to strike some people as very bizarre, maybe ludicrous, but apparently this is the new hot topic, and I have learned that people are looking into it privately, aren't telling others that they're looking into it for fear of being considered too out there or having lost their marbles. And I started looking into it because I was getting a couple of emails here and there, and I had looked into it before, but I had not really learned anything of value. And so without beating around the bush too much, I'm just going to say that today we're talking about the possibility of the Earth being flat. Okay? Yes, flat. I haven't told my mother that I'm looking into it, and several other people that we're going to talk to today have said the same thing. But there appears to be quite a bit of, let's just say, material to support this view. And I don't mean just, when we talk about evidence, we talk about proof and facts and so forth. But you know, all of us have eyes, and all of us have lived our lives for a number of decades. And the things that we consider to be normal, like the idea of perspective, we don't really understand how that works. So when that's explained to you, it tends to support the possibility that we're not living on a round, globular, spherical planet at all. So I'd like to welcome two Davids and one Greg, all of whom have begun to look into this, and we have different degrees of conviction going here. So I'll start with my friend Greg. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Hi, Sophia. How are you?
Good. Well, thank you for participating in this.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Well, we'll see. And then I'm going to bring in my friend David. I'll call him the English David.
Hello, Sophia.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this crazy discussion.
And then American David.
Hi, Sophia. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I think this is going to be fun if we can get the information out there in a coherent way, and if you will all discuss your own doubts and your degree of doubt that might still remain. So I asked everyone to take a percentage so that we could start with almost like a score pad. So I think Greg said he was 100% convinced, right?
That is correct.
Okay, well, so say
yeah,
the
I
full
am 100% convinced that we are not on a ball Earth. It is not a sphere, and I have seen no evidence to support that whatsoever, yet I have seen hundreds of points listed to prove the contrary, that it is actually a flat Earth.
Okay. And I believe second in line is the American David.
American David. I'm confused between English David and American David because I'm kind of both. But I like to have a little skepticism. I am looking for proof that the Earth is a ball, but I've found absolutely none so far. So I will have to say that I am 99%, if not more, that the Earth is flat.
That's great. Thank you. So we've crept down 1% or part of a percentage point.
I'm just saying that because I'm still, if I was 100%, I think I would stop looking for proof that the Earth is a ball, but I'm still looking, so I have to add a number to that, so I'm giving it a part of a percent.
All right, so English David.
So, you crazy cats, I'm a conceptual artist, so I'm really out there anyway, but you guys are really out there. I'm sitting on the fence, I'm 50-50, I'm quite new to this discussion, and I've spoken to American David before. He's very convincing, but I'm not yet convinced, but I'm open.
And why aren't you yet convinced?
Well, I think I'm so accustomed to the fact that we live on a round planet, hurtling through space at a rate that I can't even imagine, and that we've been to space and we've landed on the moon, and the sun is millions or billions of miles away. That it's impregnated in my thinking that that's the case. And only recently have I been sort of enlightened to the other side of this conversation, but I have written a song about it. It's called Truth is Stranger Than Fiction.
Well, all right. Maybe you can, we'll attach your song at the end once it's published. So, Greg, can you start with something that, I'm going to link some YouTubes here, but imagine that you were talking to someone who has absolutely no concept of this. What is the easiest, clearest thing to start with?
Well, let me start by stating that I live in Houston, Texas. It's a very large city, and you could drive for many miles and never see open land. There's just suburbs after suburbs and tall buildings now in the modern day all around, not only downtown, but our Texas Medical Center, the Galleria area, and beyond. I am very often on overpasses that you can see over a good bit of the city that extend, I can see many, many, many miles in the distance. Those buildings, I could still see the bottom of them if it weren't covered by trees and whatnot. They are not leaning back at all, or any of the qualities that you would expect from perspective if it was on the other side of a ball, where the curve should start at about, I think my understanding, about 3 miles or something like that if you're, say, a 6-foot person. That right there, as you had mentioned, we could see with our own eyes, but we're taught that empirical data and that what we see doesn't matter. We're taught to believe what they tell us. Well, I can see with my eyes that effect right there, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to know anything other than what I can see to know that there is no curve there. So I guess that's just the most basic, and then of course we can get into more specific science from there. But when I say science, but let's keep in mind too, science is a religion, and most of what we're presented is pseudoscience. The scientific method is one thing, but what we're just told is science, we're told to accept. And I trust my eyes, so that's where I would start. And this is something unlike most of the other conspiracies that I don't hold back on. I haven't mentioned this to a lot of people. But when I did mention it to a good friend briefly a few weeks back, that's where I started. We were going down the road, and I pointed out the buildings way across town and how they should be curving back from us, and we shouldn't see the whole thing.
You mean leaning back?
Leaning back, correct, not curving.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that you showed me that I found very, very strange, and there's got to be a reason for it, was the UN map. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about that, or can we turn over to American David? Because he also had a very good way of explaining that.
Which part? Explaining the flat map, the UN map?
Yeah, why don't you give a shot at explaining the UN map?
So there's, we have the globe that we're taught, is the way the planet's laid out since we're in, our first days of school, and every movie has a spinning globe on it, and that's what we're taught as the globe. But there was, many years ago, there was these flat maps, they're called the Flat Earth. I forget the exact name of the map. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but it happens to be the same map that the UN uses on their logo. Is that just them putting it in our faces, or is that them being nostalgic, to old thoughts? I don't know if you can prove it either way, but their logo is the Flat Earth map.
And may I add to that, in addition to that, many of us who have been digging down the rabbit hole know some about their numerology, and it is split up into 33 sections.
You mean their grid?
Yes, exactly. What they draw as, the latitude, longitude is,
right.
The grid that overlays their flat Earth map.
So the UN flag is the map of the flat Earth. This is what really kind of hit me upside the head. I said to myself, why would they have that? And we all know that the UN is kind of a shady thing the more you look into it, right? Mm-hmm. So explain about that laurel wreath that goes around the UN map, the UN logo's circumference.
So let me jump in on this. For those of you that have never heard this before, the flat Earth explanation is that the sun orbits in a flat circle over what used to be a giant ice sheet, and it melted a circle. I call it a puddle, and its heat only goes a certain amount to the left, the outside of its circumference, and to the right, the inside of its circumference. And that center part that it hasn't melted is our North Pole. And Antarctica, which nobody is allowed to go to for any reason whatsoever. There's 40 countries, blocking any access to it. No one's allowed to store fuel within 1,000 miles or some crazy distance of it. Is not a continent. It's a circle. It's the outside of the puddle, and it's an ice wall which keeps us in our known world. So you're not going to fall off the edge of the flat Earth. If the Earth was flat, how come you don't fall off the edge? It's because it's frozen solid on the outside. We're just a puddle in this giant ice sheet.
So that is really, Antarctica is really like an ice shelf that surrounds the Earth. It's like a barbed wire fence made of icy terrain and mountains, and they make it very big on the globe Earth. You see that Antarctica is this huge thing, and I actually know two people who went to Antarctica. One was a radio engineer, and there was some broadcasting thing that was being done down there, and the other one was a cook, a chef, and he worked in some facility that was on Antarctica. Then I believe he slipped on the ice, broke his leg, and had to come back. So I actually know two people who went to Antarctica.
So that's a number one ball Earth theorist argument. People have gone to Antarctica. Well, yes, there are trips to Antarctica from Chile, from New Zealand, and from the tip of Africa, Johannesburg. Those are the closest points to the outer ring. And yes, there are trips to the very edge of Antarctica. Maybe they go 100 miles in. Maybe they only go 10 miles in. I'm not sure. But there are trips, and you can see it. But it's a ring. It's not a continent.
Right. But nonetheless, the people I know, actually, I have to clarify and be totally straightforward. My friend's brother was the guy who fell, but he spent a year on Antarctica. So I know of him. And the other person was a friend of mine, and he spent a year on Antarctica. But as you say, it was probably just on the very edge and very controlled. And of course, it's very cold. You can't do much, can't go far. But it's fascinating to me that there's this ice wall around this thing that we live on, and I would assume that the thing is round. This ice wall goes in a circle, and so if the North Pole on the UN flag is in the center, then everywhere you go out from that, you would eventually reach this thing called Antarctica. And so the concept of the globe that we live on is, to me, the perfect electric fence. The way that you pen your dog in by setting up a little shock for a few days, and then he'll never go past the edge of the yard.
It's that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is it's just a way to convince everybody that you've seen it all. There's nothing more to see. The only other place to go is up into space. And, people don't have access to that. So people stop looking because there's nowhere else to go.
I think what you're saying is that it's all charted. We know all of it. And there's no point trying to be an explorer because, we've gone everywhere. We've charted the Earth. So, English David, do you want to say a few things about your discovery process and why you've now gone on to the fence and are kind of staying there?
Well, from what you guys are talking about, you're telling me that I'm living on a relatively flat piece of land that's surrounded by ice, and I'm physically not allowed to go over that ice. Now, I don't know if that's true. I understand there's some treaty in place, but I find it very difficult to believe that if I get to a certain point within Antarctica, I can't go any further. But can someone confirm that for me?
I'll confirm it. It's the Antarctic Treaty. I'm not sure if that's the exact name, but nobody is allowed to go there. No oil companies, no country for any reason, and it's not even up for discussion. I think until 2040. You can't even discuss it.
I mean, that's pretty suspect, isn't it? To get a group of people on this planet to agree to anything is near on impossible. And my understanding of corporations, if there's money to be made, then the digging will be done. So that is pretty suspect. So that's why I'm sitting on the fence. So there seems to be something that's not quite right about Antarctica. That's right, but I don't know what it is. So that's where I'm at the moment with this discussion.
Well, yeah, I challenge you or anyone to try to find any copies of any documents or anything with, say, for example, Exxon trying to explore there. You won't find it. You have all of these countries that are continuously at war and bickering with each other who are all together on the agreement that they have this Antarctic treaty and together they're going to protect it because it's no man's land and we shouldn't fight over it. I mean, it's just absurd.
There's
And
no
early explorers have gone around. James Clark Ross, Captain Cook, I mean, they spent years trying to find an inlet into the Arctic ice. And they would travel hundreds and thousands of miles, I guess, beyond where the distance it should actually take them on a ball Earth. And not only that, but all the explorers, everybody out in the water that are going with this ball Earth map, they end up 12 to 16 miles out of reckoning each day, and sometimes I understand up to 29 miles out of reckoning, which makes total sense if they're going by a ball Earth and you're on a flat Earth. And that happens continuously. And I mean, have been countless shipwrecks and stuff because of that, because they're following the ball Earth map.
Before we go into the ball Earth map versus the flat Earth map and the Mercator projection and stuff like that, which I want to talk about, I'm going to read you what Wiki says about the Antarctic Treaty System. The Antarctic Treaty and related agreements, collectively known as the Antarctic Treaty System, ATS, regulate international relations with respect to Antarctica, Earth's only continent without a native human population. For purposes of the treaty system, Antarctica is defined as all of the land and ice shelves south of 60 degrees S latitude. The treaty, entering into force in 1961 and as of 2015 having 52 parties, sets aside Antarctica as a scientific preserve, establishes freedom of scientific investigation, and bans military activity on that continent. The treaty was the first arms control agreement established during the Cold War. The Antarctic Treaty Secretariat headquarters have been located in Buenos Aires, Argentina since September 2004. So it was opened for signature December 1st, 1959, and officially entered into force in 1961, June 23rd. So yeah, it's a scientific preserve. Hey!
that treaty came into effect right after the story, whether you believe it or not, of Admiral Byrd, who flew into Antarctica and claimed that he came across a vast tropical land past the ice shelf, and that Antarctica has all sorts of researches, oil, coal, minerals, unlimited, vast area. And then he comes back. They quiet him up pretty quickly. They have the Antarctic Treaty, and then they also threw out the Van Allen radiation belt that we can't go through that, I believe, the same year.
They said we can't go through it, or they what?
NASA came out and announced that there's the Van Allen radiation belt and that it's going to be impossible for humans to fly through it. So they capped us off, they put a fence around us, and they put a fence over us.
And I will say that what led me into this, started with looking into the whole idea of the moon landing hoax years ago. I looked at that, and more recently into now discovering and believing fully that and I know these are other topics maybe I shouldn't even mention, but they are very much related, that I don't believe the International Space Station exists as we're told. I think the whole space program is a hoax. And even until very recently, I was responding to some and using the Van Allen belt as part of my defense. And now, the deeper I dig, the more understanding, the more beliefs I have to scrap from the past. And now I have to question, does that thing even exist? I don't even know about this whole idea of space, much less some fake fence up there. So that is interesting. I didn't realize that that was supposedly brought up at the same time as the Antarctic Treaty.
Well, that's right. This is the granddaddy of all conspiracies, isn't it? I mean, I woke up, probably not as much as you guys, but a little bit to the financial conspiracy that's going on around the planet. It's taking place right now as we speak. And we're talking about something that's so extreme, it's so out there, that my pre-programmed little British head is screaming at me, no, it can't be true. This cannot be true. You must be bonkers. And, I still find it hard to break through that programming, because what you're telling me is that we've fundamentally been lied to about everything that we're taught via the TV, newspapers is absolute balderdash. I don't know.
And school. I mean, really what it tells you is how malleable and pliable the human brain, consciousness, awareness system is, that you can start feeding it all this trash that runs counter to what you're actually seeing, what the human being is seeing, and it will still believe what it's given as text from authorities and authoritative sources,
And those authoritative sources contradict themselves constantly. They just hope that you won't look at 2 points of data at the same time.
Dave, I was talking to Dave offline, and he puts his hands on his head, and he's like, the conspiracy is just too big to believe. And honestly, that's my toughest spot to get over, because if you really, really think about it, the coordination and understanding and to put this false reality in front of us has to be so massive that it's unbelievable. But the facts don't support it. If you look at the facts and see what, your eyes tell you and not what the mainstream media tells you, that outweighs my belief.
And let's keep in mind, too, that the idea of a flat Earth was going on for maybe thousands of years, much, much longer. And this idea of a round Earth is still in history a relatively new concept. And my understanding was that Pythagoras came up with it, and that he was referred to sometimes as the first Freemason. I haven't looked to confirm that, but that's what I've heard, and it would make sense. So this whole idea is still relatively new, that people, many cultures for a very long time had the flat Earth maps, had an understanding what we're now trying to get back to.
And I believe it was the churches that pushed the globe Earth theory. And we know that churches are to control the masses. Religions are to control the masses, and they're the main pushers of the ball Earth theory.
Right, and I am not a religious man myself, so I feel like I'm kind of contradicting myself by saying this term, but I feel the whole entire system is satanic. I don't believe in some red-horned devil Satan, but I believe in that same evil force. And I think that everything, this whole idea of a ball Earth, is satanic. NASA and everything they have to present is satanic in nature.
What gives you the basis to say that it's satanic, apart from the fact that if it is Freemason launched, we know that many of them practice satanic rituals at the high levels?
I guess just from my history of digging down the rabbit hole and seeing all these people heavily involved in the occult, and everything that I see is very evil and is counter to everything I see as good. That to me kind of in itself means satanic. And I think when you are covering up intelligent design and helping us figure out who God is, what God is, that in itself is satanic.
Also, the numbers, the 33 sections on the flat map. NASA is on the 30. Their Cape Canaveral, I believe, is on the 33rd parallel, and it's runway 33, and the speeds of the Earth flying through space are 667 thousand miles an hour or whatever the speed is, but it's really not. The people are rounding up at 666. It might even be 0.66. I'm not sure. They're just making up these ridiculous numbers, and numerologically, it all goes back to these practices. And we know that the elite all practice satanic rituals.
Okay, so I want to ask some very basic questions for listeners who may be as bewildered as I am or was, because I'm not 100% sure of anything now. And so the first question I want to ask, and one of you can decide you want to answer it, is what about the pictures from space of the globe?
Well, I'll jump in and say that they've been using one of them since the Apollo 17 mission repeatedly to present day. If they had all these so-called, 20,000 satellites and whatnot, we would see, I would think, countless beautiful images from space. We don't see any. And the ones that we do see, NASA admits themselves that they have to use Photoshop to put them together, that they are received in ribbons of imagery. And it is just absolutely absurd to think that they're being honest in this case. Why not just take a photograph? If you get onto Google Earth, for example, and back up, it doesn't take too far above the Earth to where it's very, very, very clearly a digital image. And that's because those images are not taken from satellites that couldn't possibly exist in the heat of the space they're allegedly in. They couldn't possibly float around in some magical vacuum of space. So anyway, we don't see these images. Every one that we're shown, they admit, are put together in Photoshop.
People say that we go back to that 1970 or something image from the Apollo 17, I think it was, of the Earth. They still use that image today. That's not even a real image. That's an image of the Earth through a round window in a dark, low orbiting capsule, and it's not the Earth from space. And then all of the images that we see. I just watched one this morning. So it's like, what does the back of the moon look like? And supposedly it's a satellite from behind the moon filming the Earth spinning around and around as the sun keeps shifting around the moon. And if you watch the Earth, it spins. You can watch at least 5 or 6 days of spinnings, and the clouds never change. There's these lines of clouds that are exactly the same from day to day to day. It's laughable. It's just, once you see the truth, you watch these images, like, how about in the space station? We see images of guys floating around. They're holding that microphone and squirting water, but you never see longer than a 30-second clip at the longest before it's edited. And they're doing it all in in what they call the vomit comet or the 0G plane.
Can I just go back to this picture point, because I've heard this raised many times, but I go onto Google, I put images, planet Earth, and there's stacks of pictures out there, guys, stacks of pictures. But what makes a composite and what makes a real picture? Can someone explain that to me?
If you look at the colors that they're putting in these images, if you watch lots of them, you'll see that there's Photoshop clouds where it's the same cloud formation in a whole bunch of different places. They're just stamping and repeating it. It's just not realistic imagery. Some of them have stars in the background. Some of them don't have stars in the background.
Shapes of continents are not consistent.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. And whenever you see live imagery supposedly from the viewing window on the space station, the Earth is covered in clouds because they can't reckon where continents are supposed to be. So it's always cloud covered, always. And you have no idea where you are. And astronauts have made many mistakes on where they're broadcasting from. There's so many bloopers out there. It's just laughable.
Well, there are
And
lots of bloopers, that's very sure. But can I just ask you again, then, because I've got a brand new Megane outside, a sports eco something, and for sure it's got a camera in that car that watches me wherever I go. Okay, for sure. If I look through the driving handbook, it will tell me that. Yet I wonder, why isn't there a camera either on the space station or the moon watching the Earth, and there's a direct stream coming 24/7?
and with supposedly like 20,000 plus satellites, we could have that very easily. You would think that NASA, being so long in existence and as powerful as they are with all the money that they have, that we would see exactly a live stream if we wanted, but there isn't. And you would also suspect that if America had to, won the race to the moon, that the photo that they're going to show from Apollo 17 of the Earth might show America there, or the United States, I should say. But instead, it's what, the other side of the Earth or something? It's just absurd.
One more thing about the Apollo shot is we had all these missions to the moon and around the moon, and on the very last one, they decided to turn around and take a picture of the Earth. One picture, then they canceled the Apollo missions. It's because if they did it before, people would want more, and then they wouldn't be able to match up the photos.
That's a really interesting point, David. A very interesting point. I mean, I've recently come across this topic of, NASA not being completely top of the brand honest, and the people like who's the guy who landed first? Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong been asked to swear on his life on the Bible that he went to the moon, and he failed to do so, along with the other key astronauts who've built fabulous careers based on that information. And I showed it to my 14-year-old son, who's been taught at school, about the moon landings, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, of course they went to the moon." And I said, "Well, watch this. Just tell me what you think." And he said, "Dad, they didn't go to the moon, did they?" And I said, "I don't know, but I don't think so, son." So something's just not right.
If you watch the press conference after the three of them got back from the moon, you'd think these are the three guys that just went to the moon, and they're sitting at a press conference, and they should be ecstatic. But they're sitting there, they're traumatized, they look miserable. Just look at their faces, and it tells you something is not right.
Well, go on.
I'd like to get to this idea of images from space. I'm looking at the Hubble telescope. And I know that when that was first made, there was an error in I think it's the mirror. Actually, I know someone who worked for the company that made that mirror. It was Perkin Elmer in Connecticut. And they were very, very embarrassed, and we were told that the Hubble telescope pictures, the first run, were all bad, right? And now I'm realizing from Wiki that those optics were corrected to their intended quality by a servicing mission in 1993. So where are the pictures from the Hubble telescope? Does anyone know?
They're all fake. They're all completely computer generated. That thing doesn't even exist. They can get photos of galaxies, light years away, but they can't give us one photo of the Earth?
Right. It's a telescope that is in low Earth orbit. So
I don't believe that exists.
Okay, so it says here, Hubble's orbit outside the distortion of Earth's atmosphere allows it to take extremely high-res images with negligible background light. Hubble has recorded some of the most detailed visible light images ever, allowing a deep view into space and time. Okay, so I guess it's going the other way. It's not taking Earth pictures.
Well,
Right.
What I'm saying is, why, if they can do such beautiful imagery with that, then why can we not get one good photo of the Earth?
Right.
And
Good.
And that's another thing, when they're in space outside this alleged International Space Station, you will never, ever, ever see, out of the thousands of hours or whatever it is of footage they have, any camera movement that looks towards the Earth and then goes and does a 180-degree turnaround to the other side. Because it's all staged, as American David said. I mean, it's all fake. It's also done with wires and stuff, so a lot of it takes place in zero-G planes, but a lot is that. But this whole idea of being in orbit, like one other thing that I said I have to rethink and discard previous beliefs the deeper I dig. I no longer believe, like I liked the movie, the documentary, Something Funny Happened on the Way to the Moon, or whatever it was. And I'm here believing and telling others that no, this imagery came from them in low orbit. I don't believe they were in low orbit. It was in some kind of a craft, maybe a big balloon or something high up. I believe this whole idea of a vacuum of space is a sick joke. The idea that you can move, that there's this magical force called gravity, and all of a sudden, if you travel high enough, all of a sudden it's going to switch and you'll be in a vacuum. A vacuum cannot exist in an open system like that. It would suck up our universe, for example. I mean, it's just
Our
implausible.
atmosphere.
Yeah, our atmosphere. I'm sorry. Yeah. And so the idea that there are any satellites whatsoever up there, including a Hubble, is a joke. And somebody sent me an image the other day and said, what if the universe was God or something like this? And it showed some images comparing somebody's eye, a close-up of their eye and the retina and everything, and then showed some imagery supposedly from the Hubble. Well, it looked almost identical, and that's because I think they sample a lot of imagery, such as parts of our eyes and things like that, and manipulate it from there to get what they want to label as this constellation or that galaxy. But it all falls to pieces with any scrutiny whatsoever.
They also do, besides doing it in the zero-G plane or with wires, they also do a lot of their filming in a blacked-out pool, the NASA pool. And in some of the NASA footage, you'll see an astronaut, doing a spacewalk, supposedly gets bumped, and a bubble will float out from his spacesuit. And one of the astronauts almost drowned in space. And they claimed that his water system filled, his drinking system filled up his helmet, which was incredible, which is ridiculous. So now all the space walking suits have snorkels in them, and there was even a shot where they were filming an astronaut supposedly on a space station, and on one of the wings of the space station, through one of the windows, you could see a guy with a scuba tank in space.
Okay, I sent you guys a link. It says "Get ready for Google Earth on steroids." And it talks about Felix Baumgartner, Austrian skydiver, October 12th, 2012. He went 127,852 feet into the stratosphere, launched off a platform, barreled back toward Earth at a speed of 843 mph. And I'm telling you, this picture is a fake picture.
Is this the Red Bull one, or this is something different?
Just go to the link I sent.
Yeah,
you can see that his outline is totally cut out and laid over over a background of what looks like satellite photo of the Earth, but the typical clouds and blue. But this is not a real photograph, even I can tell. It's two images superimposed. And this company, EarthCast, is a Canadian startup harnessing the power of technology to bring us some never-before-seen images of the Earth from space. State-of-the-art cameras and a web platform that will stream live images of the planet and events unfolding in real time. Think of it as Google Earth on steroids. But I'm telling you something, I think this is just PR.
There has to be someone out there who can verify or qualify whether these photographs are real or not. To my eye, I couldn't tell that this was a fake, Sophia, to be honest with you.
No, you don't know enough about art, graphics. It's
correct.
Easy. Greg, tell us. Greg is a graphic artist.
Well, I can't access the email you sent here. I think it's buried.
It's not an.
Oh, no, it isn't.
Go to the Skype link.
Okay, I'm not used to using Skype, so I didn't realize that. But I know, like, as far as the Red Bull one, not just graphics put together, but we can all see, if you look at that Red Bull jump, there's a shot from inside the capsule that is different from the one outside the capsule. The one inside the capsule is not a fisheye lens and seems like a flat Earth below, which, of course, isn't shown very long, but the rest of it, I guess, is GoPro footage or something with the wide-angle lens that everybody's used to seeing that distorts it so greatly that nobody would ever question it if they weren't already questioning it.
Okay, Greg, I do want you to look at this photo because you are a professional graphic artist. So go to that link, please.
Okay, let me see about finding it here.
It's in your Skype chat.
Okay. Just while we're waiting for Greg, what you guys are saying is that we are in one big, huge lie, okay? I think there's a song by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. And that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
I'm looking at a photo that I expected to be convincing, and it's clearly not. You can see where they outline the entire body, cut it out of a different picture, cut it away from another background. Even the wires, it's all cut out. Greg, do you see this?
I've seen the first photo of the alleged astronaut.
Yes. That's a fake photo.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Absolutely.
That would have done. I mean, of course, they could have used just a simple green screen for that if it's not within a video. But then, as American David had mentioned, that they use the pools all the time for their spacewalks, so there could be a still from that with their fake scenery behind it. But yeah, it doesn't look real. But then again, it's tough for my brain to backpedal and to go back to seeing the world like an average Joe, because my brain kind of can't go back. And when I see things like this that I know in my heart 100% are fake, I don't even really analyze it maybe as much as I should. I look at it and I'm like, of course that's fake. But when I do analyze anything, it becomes pretty clear. Yeah, you can see telltale signs of certain ones. I'd have to look at this closer and zoomed in Photoshop, but you can often see, like Sofia is mentioning, with different effects around the edges that are telltale signs of layering of images, for example.
I don't know what's above him, but if you look at the light shining down on the platform he's standing on, how come the light isn't hitting him from the same angle? I mean, it's just not a real photo.
Mm-hmm.
No, and it's not on that other lamp-looking thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm going to post this image. I just saved a big copy of it from Google, and I sent you guys the link from Google Images, and now you can see it bigger. It's not. Even if I believed 100% in the round Earth, which I don't anymore. I don't know what percentage I am, but that is a fake photo.
So here's the proof of a round Earth. If you look at the top left-hand corner of that photo, you see that little curvature there? There's your proof of a round Earth, and that's what they use. And people say, look, I can see the curve. The Earth is round.
Okay, so the space pictures, even though English David says there are lots of them, and I see lots of them, they all have kind of a very similar quality. They all look something like from the same album, and the blackness behind them, the very clear circumscription of the circle in most of them, the repeated photo, the repeated image. Here's one that's kind of like a moon, the moon filling out, but it's the Earth. So I want to ask a little more about the map. There's something called a Mercator projection in maps, which is the flattened map of the world. And we all were taught in school that, this is distorted because they had to take something round and smush it. And one of them is like a cut orange peel. Maybe that's the Mercator projection. Another one is a full flat rectangle where they fill in, and it makes Greenland look massive. But I've learned that even the continents on the globe version of the Earth, when you have a globe that you spin in your library or schoolroom or office, the shapes and sizes of those continents are not correct. Is that right?
That is correct. They show, Africa and Greenland, but when Greenland is actually, I think, how much bigger than Africa is it? Is it 17 times bigger? Or I forget the exact number, but the proportions are way off on everything.
Yeah, and they tell you on the flat map, they tell you that you couldn't avoid it. It had to be done. But on the globe, apparently it's also, and I read somewhere that this was created so that the Western world could feel more mighty because its land was shown larger than the third world countries and continents. And that really and truly Africa is some enormous thing. Much bigger than we see on our normal globes. So I found that to be interesting. And then there is the matter of the horizon. The horizon rising to eye level. There are some very good videos. I'm going to put them up They're not long. They're very good introductions to seeing. I mean, we do see correctly to start with, but we don't know why we see what we see. We're not taught to interpret the way that perspective and the visual line, the eye line, the horizontal eye level horizon works. And it always works the same way. So who would like to take a crack at that?
So I would on a ball Earth. If you want to just take it down to your experience, imagine standing on a hill, just on a nice field, on a hill or on a road that's sloping away. As you start climbing up a ladder or rising up into the air, that horizon is going to fall away from you because it's curving over the Earth at an ever increasing rate. So if you're over the Earth, over a round ball Earth, the higher you go, the farther you're going to see that curve is going to drop away. But if you're on an endless plane, that plane is going to reach the vanishing point where the sky touches the ground, visually, and reaches the vanishing point because our eyes can only see so far. And no matter how high you go, the horizon always stays at eye level. And the only way that can work, that is on a flat plane. I'll say an endless flat plane because I don't have a better way to describe it. And that was the one thing that really made me start looking into this. And it's one I really can't explain away.
Yeah, and that's where I was starting out my discussion, is saying that when I see these buildings in the distance, there's no sign of a curve, that the horizon is always the same. 35,000 feet up or standing on the beachfront.
So the biggest argument, and it was my first argument, what about the ship, going over the horizon? We've all seen that 3 or 4 masted old ship that they show us in school to this very day, going over the horizon. But if you watch it, it's edited. Every time the ship moves, they edit it down to make it short. They lower the camera level and the water level rises up. And it does look like you're losing the bottom of the ship, but that's just a perspective vanishing point thing. I did it the other day, a couple weeks ago. I went down to the beach. I watched a barge, tugboat pulling a barge, and I watched it go over the horizon until I couldn't see it. It's gone over the horizon. I broke out my binoculars. I can see the entire ship again. And if I had a telescope after that went out of range, I break out the telescope, and there it is again. Impossible on a flat Earth.
And as long as
on a round Earth. Sorry.
And if we're talking about the water, then we could talk about the lighthouses and other structures that are seen. My understanding is that the Statue of Liberty on clear weather can be seen up to 60 miles away, whereas I guess it should be somewhere near a mile below the curve.
2,400 feet. 60 miles is 2,400 feet below your horizon.
Okay, so half a mile. But yeah, it's unbelievable what they pass off as truth, and nobody questions it.
Right.
And lighthouses can be seen for many, many, many miles, far beyond. And the curvature, the refraction of the light from the lighthouses can only be explained for something like a 1/12 of the distance from the light, but certainly not 20 miles or more away.
Well,
now, I learned. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I'm looking over the Mediterranean right now, and it's very, very flat. But just to my eyes, there seems to be a curve from the left over to the right as I look over to Africa. It does seem to be the case. But when I put my arm up in front of my eyes, as we speak, it's very flat. But I'm very confused about this point.
So I'd like to address that real quickly. When we can only see a certain distance before our eyes reach that vanishing point. So when you're looking, imagine you're looking across a flat plane and you're looking at 12 o'clock straight ahead. And you could see, let's say it's, whatever X number of feet or miles or whatever.
It's 13 miles. For a 6-foot man, he can see 13 miles in front of him if it's not blocked by something.
Well, I don't know about that.
No, that is the calculation that they throw at us to convince us that it's at that point that's as far as you can see, and then the Earth starts to curve. I think what they're really telling us is that you can see at that height 13 miles in front of you. Just go with it.
Well, 10 miles is 66 feet drop off of the horizon if the Earth is 25,000 miles around. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. But what I was saying is we want to see a globe because we're taught it's a globe. So when you look out at 12 o'clock, you can see a certain distance. When you look out at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you can see that same distance. And if you draw a line across that flat plane, it's a big curved line. You can see the same number of feet to the left, to the right, and at all the degrees in between. That's a big curve on a flat surface. It reaches vantage point. You see a curve, you say, okay, it's a ball. But it's a curve on a flat line, on a flat plane. That's all you're seeing, and you're thinking ball.
And English David mentioned looking across out on the Mediterranean. Well, the Suez Canal that runs between the Mediterranean Sea and the Gulf of Suez runs about 100 miles in length. Just like with all the railways, tunnels, any such canals, they are never engineered with a curve in mind. These are solid proofs of a completely flat Earth. There are no locks in between the waterways in that canal because the water is level on both sides. Whereas if it was a ball Earth, it shouldn't be an equal distance scraped out from underneath. That right there, all the railways that are laid out for hundreds of miles. In fact, engineers claim that there's no way they would ever get in a train that had to traverse a global Earth.
Why?
Now, that part I was still kind of questioning even until this morning. And I think as far as the engineers, I'm just guessing part of it is in a sense, you're climbing, but also I guess could have miles of train and so much weight behind you that could maybe push you. I don't know. There's something about it that I read a lot of quotes from earlier engineers saying that, they wouldn't take that task on, that it's tough enough to make other adjustments on a horizontal plane, much less if it were a ball Earth.
But, all land. I knew a civil engineer who told me it was harder to engineer a mile of road than a skyscraper because there's so many variations in building a road. And I would think that train tracks, the Earth isn't completely flat. It's contoured. The terrain, the topography is it's not like a tile surface. So you're on a contoured surface. So I don't understand why that doesn't present issues to them.
Well, I think they do. They do have issues along the way, but in India, for example, they've laid out, hundreds of miles of track and without any engineering whatsoever for a curvature.
Right, but when you lay track, your lengths of railroad track are relatively short, and on that very sort of microscopic, when you're going in that close, it's flat for all intents and purposes. But I'm saying it's not because it's bumpy.
Yes, exactly, and that's one thing a couple people have said is, come on, there's mountains and this and that. Yes, there's a lot of variation throughout this flat Earth, but generally speaking, it is flat.
Right. So I'm going to ask a question now. If we're on some kind of a round thing with a shelf around it, does anyone know if we're on like a coin with a big old ice barbed wire, don't go any further ring around it? Is that what we're on?
That doesn't make any sense to me. What makes sense to me is that it is a endless flat plane, frozen with maybe 2 mile thick ice sheet, and where our puddle is, we have our capacitor, our sun melted away the ice and left an ice ring. And perhaps just, according to if Admiral Byrd's story is real, that there's other puddles just, hundreds of miles over that wall, maybe thousands of miles, but, where other civilizations can live, where other, inhabitable areas. Are they inhabited? Is our military using them now? Are they invading them? Are they? Did MH317 or whatever the flight was that disappeared? Did they fly it there and steal all of the brain power on there to populate these new areas? Did the millions of children that go missing every decade, are they being relocated there? The possibilities are unlimited. These are just ideas. But, if you believe in extraterrestrials, what's more realistic? Are they coming from trillions of miles away or a short plane ride?
Yeah, I've heard both theories that there's sort of a dome at some point, and then also that one, as you just mentioned, about the eternal plane of ice with other pockets cut out in it. I don't think any of us who are going to be having this discussion amongst each other know, and they all, I can't rule out any of the above myself. One way I like to view it, I think a puddle isn't a bad analogy, but I like to think of it as a hole on a putting green, as we're just this sunken down thing. And it definitely seems more plausible to me that if there is any other life, that it will be on somebody else on our plane just through that ice and another one of those little pockets cut out. Because everything we've seen about space just seems like utter fantasy to me and nothing but. And so they want us to think that we are very, very insignificant. I think that's a big part of what it boils down to. And though I think if we're having this discussion already that our brains kind of function a little bit differently than a lot of people, and maybe a lot of people feel smaller in size and less important. It doesn't affect me the same way, but I can still understand the argument that if they tell you that there are just countless galaxies out there and we're just a speck and there's other life form out there and all that, then it makes us feel very, very insignificant. And as I said earlier, I'm not a religious man, but now this is a time where I wish that all my Christian family and stuff would open their minds to have some discussions with me about this stuff. And let's see what might be in the Bible that is kind of telling some truths and what we might be able to figure out about this, how we were created, how we came here. But they want us to feel like worthless little drops, where I think that we are it. Though there could be other little pockets out there, I think that basically we are the creation.
All right, skeptical David, would you like to weigh in on that?
Well, then we're talking about God, aren't we? I'm not religious, but I believe we are all spiritual. But it's that's a massive conversation. And my question when I was listening to everyone speak was, okay, who are they? And I then asked that question. And why on earth, forgive me for the pun, but why on earth are we told that we're living on a round ball, yet you crazy cats claim we're on a flat plane, I guess?
Well, what they're saying is, it sounds to me that, there's the sun. We have to talk about the sun. There's a video I'm going to link. The sun as it circles on the Tropic of Capricorn, the Tropic of Cancer, and then the equator is the ring in the middle. And when you see that the sun actually moves in a spiral, and when it gives us the seasons in what we call the northern hemisphere, it's really running along the tropic. I think it's Cancer, the closer one, and it's closer to the what we call the northern hemisphere, the interior of the puddle. And then as it spirals out to the Tropic of Capricorn, I believe it's the other one, that we believe to be south of the equator, and it gives those regions their summer, because it's out there spiraling, and then it'll spiral back in. Now, what I find very interesting, this video explains it, is the whole zodiac as it ties in. The months, in every month, we have Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, etc., etc. This all has to do with the position of the sun, which is what David calls a capacitor, circling on this spiral path that it has. And the idea that this ice was melted with this capacitor upon which this thing called life would then heavily, entirely depend, that makes a lot of sense to me. That this experiment is contained in this puddle, and it is ringed with freezing temperatures and some kind of wall rim, which is what the laurel wreath in the UN map flag thing stands for. That is Antarctica, that leaf wreath. And then we don't go beyond that because we're told we're on something that is circular and therefore there's nowhere to go. But the idea that we might be an experiment created in this puddle with this electric thing or whatever it is called the sun. And when you really understand electricity, I've begun to study biophysics and bioelectricity a little bit. We are so dependent on electrons. Electrons are the material of this exchange on the cellular level that enables life.
That's fascinating, Sophia. You're suggesting that we're living in a test of some form. Is that correct? Because clearly there are tests where I can't remember what it's called. Maybe someone can help me out. But when we visually look at something, we change the outcome of that particular environment. And of course, there's cameras everywhere. If you go to London, there's cameras absolutely on every single corner of London right now. It's a complete police state. But you're saying that this is one big experiment, and if you are saying that, it's pretty scary.
It's a petri dish in a lab of some kind, but we don't know what the lab is, and we don't know what's beyond our petri dish. But we're in the dish, and there's this capacitor circling the dish upon which our lives depend.
So that really makes you believe in some sort of creator, because this is not a random incident. And getting back to Greg's question of why would they hide this from us, we know that the powers that be, and I'm going to go with Dave saying that they're satanic, that it's a satanic ruling over us. They don't want us to realize the power that we have. And one way is just to make us feel insignificant and then keep our vibration of fear with all of this fake terror. And it's a genius plan, and they're doing a great job at it.
Well, that's really key, isn't it? Because the more I get into the conversation with you guys, the more I realize that it's my frequency that determines my my experience of this thing that we call life, okay? Because clearly everything's up for question. And, in England, we've got the telephone number for the emergency services is 999. You put that round the other way, you've got 666. Now, I don't know about this numerological conversation that much, okay? But I'm guessing you guys probably do. But there seems to be something in certain numbers, 763, and it does seem to lead back to some form of Luciferian worship. I mean, even on the south coast of Spain, there is a group that meets in secret to worship Lucifer. I throw this out to you. What do you think is beyond those walls? Really, if we are enclosed by ice, what's beyond that ice?
I would like to know.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it would make sense, if you have this giant ice plane and you have a capacitor, making this petri dish, why wouldn't there be thousands, millions, billions more of them? Or maybe there's just one. Again, we don't know. We know there's one.
Well, I have to bring up my stupid little thing that I told English David once. I said, no wonder the male penguins guard the eggs in Antarctica. They stand on these eggs for like a year. I don't know how long it is. I can't remember. But if anyone watched the movie March of the Penguins, and I said to Dave, English Dave, who by the way lives in Spain, that's why he's looking at the Mediterranean, or right now he's living there. So I said, the male penguins are guarding their eggs. They're protecting their unborn young from whatever is behind on the other side of that wall.
That was the silliest thing I've heard you say.
It was just a thought. Is it aliens? What is it? But they do guard those eggs for a very long time. They never leave them.
But just getting back to this flat Earth, okay, there are people doing experiments, aren't there? I know one of the flat earthers wants to get a boat and then a plane and fly around the internal wall of the Antarctic, and reckons that he will eventually come back to the boat. as an example. That sounds very logical to me.
Yeah, but he can't do it. They won't let him do it. I mean, why doesn't somebody fly from Australia to Johannesburg right over? It's a short, 10, 12-hour flight right over Antarctica. And the ball earthers say, oh, it's too cold over Antarctica, which is, baloney.
Clearly you
And
can't you?
No,
nobody's ever done that.
you can't because there's no shortcuts on a flat Earth. To fly from Chile to Australia, the plane route, you have to fly over the North Pole. You can't fly across the Southern Hemisphere. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and
Because
there are so many points that prove that it's a flat Earth, and the flight patterns are one of them. If you look at these flights where they have these stops for refueling and whatnot for these longer international flights, and you look on a map at where they stop, it looks unbelievably just so wrong on a ball Earth map. They're going straight up and then straight back down, practically far, far, far from efficient. If you look at those lines on a flat Earth map, they make perfect sense and they're a slight dogleg at best.
right, you go from Chile to Australia, but you stop in London or Dubai, and it's a giant V on a ball Earth, but on a flat Earth, it's a straight line. It's
Hmm.
it's it's with a stop for fuel. You know,
And there's one of these flat Earth YouTubers out there who I have don't agree with him on some things, but he's put some stuff out there that I've learned from. And one more recent video of his from Stars or Souls, he mentions the 9/11 connection, and this is regarding the planes. And he was coming up with this idea that part of the reason of 9/11, which he admits would have benefits for many people on different levels, but part of it could be to hide the flat Earth because of the alleged flights involved in this and the way the flight tracking system, who had control of it and so forth, that, well, now all of a sudden they were able to say, look, terrorists could get in line, hack in, and cover up and mask planes that they fly in. So you know what? We need to take control of that whole system. We will send you the data as to where these flights are. So a man in the control tower down the road at the airports here in Houston doesn't really know where the flights are. He's just told where they are. And so that made a lot of sense, that maybe 9/11, part of it was to cover up the flat Earth.
if you look on Global Flight Tracker, any flights that come off the continent, South America, as soon as they leave the edge of the coast, they disappear and they're gone off of the GPS system, and then they reappear about an hour before they land at their location. Nothing transits across the southern hemisphere. Occasionally, you might see a flight on the electronic, imagery, but that is just electronic imagery. That's not reality.
And let me just give some
So,
figures. I guess some of these were given before, but so supposedly the Earth is spinning at approximately 1,000 miles per hour on its axis, and that revolves 67,000 miles per hour around the sun, along with the similar alleged ball planets. And then those all together are spiraling like something like, was it 5 million miles around the outer arm of the Milky Way? Taking the words directly from Eric Dubé here. And then he says the Milky Way galaxy itself is shooting through the known universe, excuse me, at a mind-numbing 670 million miles per hour. I mean, it's just absurd, these speeds. They say that if you're on the equator, yeah, that you're traveling approximately 1,000 miles per hour. So if you had an airplane take off at the equator heading somewhere, and if you were heading opposite of that spin, well, you shouldn't even really have to move. You should be able to lift up a helicopter, for example, just hover there and have it spin underneath to you. But then they have the magical ether out there, or the atmosphere that helps move the plane. So the flight to and from different places is no different in time other than a little bit of an air current, which of course would make no sense on a ball Earth. And then as far as air currents, wind currents, we've all seen the maps of the globes and these clouds and different air systems moving through. And there are always these big waves, big waves. You look at that on a flat Earth map and it makes total sense. It's more just like water going down a drain. They're going in a circle around. But yeah, the planes, flights, all that kind of stuff are just some of the many, 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 many points that prove that we've been lied to for a very long time.
Well, I'm just trying to work that out, because which way does the planet apparently spin? Am I going left or am I going right? I don't know, because I jump on a plane from London to Malaga. It takes me roughly 3 hours. Okay, and when I jump on the same plane back again, it takes me roughly 3 hours, and that's kind of always made sense to me. Of course, it would be the same, but then when you put the spinning Earth into consideration, and I start getting to maths, I get really complicated. It's like the financial system; it's so complicated. It's hard to understand what derivatives are. No one knows what derivatives are, and this whole Scientology around the Earth is so complicated. It brings up this flag to me that it's been made complicated, so I don't look into it.
The, the ball earthers will say, you already have that relative speed. If you're taking off from the equator, traveling at over 1,000 miles an hour, and you take off with the spin of the Earth, you're already going 1,000 miles an hour before the wheels start rolling down the runway. So when you accelerate to 500 miles an hour, you're going 1,500 miles an hour. As opposed to a point in space, but you're really only going 500 miles an hour with the land. Okay, you buy that. We'll even put it in the other direction. You go off against the spin of the Earth. You're going 1,000 miles an hour backwards, according to a point in space. You speed up to 500 miles an hour. You're going 500 miles an hour land speed, but you're really going 500 miles an hour backwards. Maybe I got the math wrong there, but if you do that, what happens if you take off with the spin of the Earth and you fly up to Canada, high up in Canada, and you land where the Earth is only spinning at, let's just say, 500 miles an hour? You're now moving sideways at an extra 500 miles an hour. How do you land?
That's a really good point.
And another one here that also, I've taken some notes directly from Eric Dubé, so that's where I'm kind of just taking some direct quotes. If the Earth was a sphere, a pilot who wanted to maintain altitude at a typical course cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet, over half of a mile every minute. And these pilots aren't compensating for that.
Well, the magic of gravity has them locked in at a certain altitude.
Exactly.
Gravity. We don't know much about gravity, do we?
And then this whole idea also, any idea of Hitler or anybody working on anti-gravity machinery and everything is just thrown out the window the deeper you dig. Like, there is no gravity. Just to believe in it is such a joke.
Everything in our universe is electric and magnetic, and gravity is just a form of electromagnetism that we, as in the common people, don't fully understand. It's magnetism and density, and that's how everything gets sorted out.
Okay, so surely if I throw a dart. No, that's a really bad example. But Jeranism he's putting out these scientific tests, isn't he, with a laser. Does anyone know much about what he's up to? Because I've just recently come across him.
So what he's doing, he tried to shine a laser across a span of 4 miles, which would have been 10 feet below the horizon. But the problem was when the laser got over there, it was 10 feet wide. He didn't know that the laser spread out. So then he realized, wait a minute, we got a cameraman at the other side who's just a couple feet above the water. Why don't I just shine this bright laser on a white poster board just above, inches above the sand, and see if he can see it? And yes, the guy could see it. So now he's going to do it again from 20 miles, which would be 266 feet below the horizon. But he just has to wait until the weather conditions are right, and that'll be proof beyond doubt that there's no miscalculations. The camera was 3 feet high, and this was 2 feet high, and the tide was low or whatever. That'll be undeniable proof. So that's coming up.
Yeah, I just watched his one of the 4 miles. I guess it was yesterday. I guess he had just posted it. And yeah, you could clearly see that laser across the way that I think was within 6 inches off the ground or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, we should have seen a curve by that point, though, of course, not as great of a curve as his next planned project with the laser, but that's enough. I mean, just as me seeing these buildings in the distance. I just need to see it once. But
Hey, since we're talking about lasers, I just want to jump back to the moon. Everyone says, well, we can prove we went to the moon. There's the reflectors on the moon and they shine a laser and we get a ping back. So here's the proof. A NASA scientist says, all right, we're going to fire this photon, this laser at the moon. And they're sending like 200 trillion photons, just a ridiculous number. A trillion is such a big number, people can't even fathom it. And what they get back is 1 or 2 photons. Okay? Not 1 trillion, 1 or 2 photons. And if you're shining that laser at the moon, it's going to spread out to miles and miles wide. There wouldn't even be enough energy. But it's, the computer goes, bing, oh, I got a photon back. That means there's a reflector on the moon. It's just laughable, anything NASA says.
And if the moon was the 400,000 kilometers or whatever it is away, you wouldn't be able to see the detail that we can see without even having a telescope. You wouldn't see the light that it casts on the clouds. And then the sun. They tell us the sun is 92 million miles away. Well, what I've come to understand and believe through looking into others' research on this is that it's actually more approximately the same size of the moon, is maybe a few thousand miles away, as opposed to this absurd number. But they give us these astronomical numbers, kind of like giving you legislation that's too much for the congressman to read in, the couple of hours they're given. They overwhelm you with it so that you don't ask questions, so that you don't dig.
There's proof of that called the parallax effect, where if you're on a train and you're watching the trees that are close by the tracks, they're whizzing by your eyes, but the ones way back on the hill kind of stay stationary and move very slowly. There's some video of a rocket that they shot up to, I think, 300,000 feet, and it's swinging the camera all over the place, and you can see the Earth moving, and the sun is moving wildly with it, when it should stay relatively still if it was 92 million miles away or 93 million miles away. But it's very close to the Earth.
Yeah, you would not see the sun rays as we see them at these various angles. It would be an even light. Right. And if it were a ball Earth, we would have equal 12-hour days and nights all around the place. You wouldn't see the Arctic midnight sun, that's for sure, where you can see the sun all day long or maybe not at all for a while at some places. It's just... we have been lied to about every aspect of it. And the flat Earth and space and sun and moon are all correlated, really in the same discussion, though they could each be talked about for weeks on end, just on them by themselves.
I was always skeptical that about our seasons, because I learned in school. First, I thought, before I thought about it, that we had summer when we were closer to the Earth because we have an elliptical orbit. And we had winter when we were farther away, but that's not how it is, because then they told us, no, we have summer when we're far away and winter when we're closer or something, or far away, and it has to do with the tilt of the Earth. That's why it gets so warm, and that never made any sense to me. Never. Mm-hmm. So this seasons thing makes more sense in the Petri dish example than it does in anything else, I have to say. Although it has been very, very difficult for me to give this ball thing up. I don't get it. I don't get how we're ever going to come to any agreement about this in the world if it is the case. It's just doesn't seem possible.
Well, it's possible for anyone that has the courage to look. And just look at the facts and stop believing what the, education lie system and the propaganda, broadcasting networks are telling us. I've done, as you know, Sofia, a lot of work on 9/11, Sandy Hook, and Boston bombing. I've done a lot of interviews on that, and I've made a lot of progress waking a lot of people up. But when I learned about this, I had to sit on it for a while saying, this can and will be used against me in every way. And I really thought about not coming out with it. But the more I looked into it, the big argument that people have is, this is not important. So what if it's flat? More important things are the TPP and Sandy Hook and, and exposing 9/11 and stuff. And I agree that those are important. But this too is important because we are trapped, we are slaves in this ball earth mentality, and we are limited in our consciousness because of it.
Right. Well, I think everybody has to come up with something that didn't work for them. For me, it is that seasons thing and the orbit, because I'm thinking about it now. And I never believed that when you're at one point of the oval and then the other point of the oval, you should be having summer and winter, and there's such radical differences in temperature. Or the other way, that when you're at the squashed part of the oval, you should have a completely different season.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, don't all those miles make a difference? So that was the one thing for me. And now when I saw that Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, that spiral video, I just went, wow. Oh my God, that is much more believable. So to get back to our original statements that there's so little proof or evidence, or the stuff they tell you to convince you that you're on a ball is so weak compared to what you find out when you look at perspective, being in an airplane and having the horizon line at your eye level and you're supposed to be 6 miles in the air. That's amazing to me. That there's no curve there. You would be seeing around Earth and you'd look down and you see everything is flat. That is another thing that I find to be, you can't explain it with the ball.
Yeah, but none of their numbers add up, again, if you put it up next to other numbers they give us. So you can look at one little data set, and it might match up with what you see just briefly. But then if you, say, go 6 months in the future, well, it doesn't match up. For example, the moon phases would never stay constant for 30-day cycles if you have the heliocentric, idea in mind. And just to let some people know, it's pretty obvious from the words, but a couple of terms that are used for those that are new to this are heliocentric, being that they believe that we all revolve around the sun, and then geocentric is more where, looks like, well, where I am and most of us are having this conversation these days, that everything revolves around us. And if you keep your eye on the stars and these alleged planets and whatnot, to believe that they would keep day after day, month after month, year after year for many, many, many years in the exact same position. The sun, too, to where sundials have worked perfectly, very accurately, moon dials as well for thousands of years. But you would think that there would be some sort of a shift at some point, because if you use their math, the Earth is traveling at 5.8 trillion miles, traveling 5.8 trillion miles through the universe every year. And it's looping, it's wobbling, it's shifting, it's moving around, spiraling. And if you see these graphic representations in video form that people have done of showing it the movement, to think that something wouldn't even move within an inch or a small amount, you just have to be a fool.
It's just laughable. How about that the Earth spins once every 24 hours? How come in 6 months, when we're on the opposite side of the sun, that there's not that 12 noon isn't 12 midnight? Because if you're turning around of 360 degrees, and go 180 degrees around, now you're on the other side. When it's noon, it should be midnight, but it's not.
That's a good point. Yep. That's a very good point.
I think it's a great point. Coming in from a layman's perspective, my mind rejects everything. It's saying, no, you're crazy. But the more I think about it, I realize that we are clearly being lied to. And this would be the conspiracy of all conspiracies. And whether you guys are all American, but we all know anyone who's got any sort of sense then that Barack Obama is a complete and utter falsehood, as an example. And I remember he came in and I cried when he's inaugurated. I thought, really, this is going to change. And since then, I realized that everything that I've ever been taught is a lie. And it's kind of heartbreaking, and I don't want to go there, but this is the lie, the conspiracy of all conspiracies. And if we could break it open and get a conversation going, it would be fantastic.
And I have to wonder, and I've said the same thing, that this is the biggest conspiracy of them all. But I think there must be something even beyond that we can't even fathom because of our lack of knowledge on the topic. That I think, I mean, things could be even bigger. Like, well, we could start getting answers of, what's next to us, or if anything. But it's mind blowing, and it is tough. Even having been down the rabbit hole for about a decade now, it's still tough to grasp some of it. I mean, even though I believe it, I don't doubt myself on certain things. Although I continuously question my beliefs and like to have them challenged all the time. I don't know where I was going with that. Excuse me.
We just had a. Oh, go ahead, Sophia.
I just wanted to say, if we're in, I call it the Petri dish, and we're being observed, it makes so much more sense that there would be chemtrails, there would be this engineered desiccation, drought, this attempt to convert all of nature into synthetic life, into a system that depends on and springs from a whole other kind of genesis that isn't organic. Now it makes complete sense, because somehow to have that impression that we are contained, and we're not, the difference between the Petri dish and the globe is that one is more like concave and the other is convex. And there's something about the convexity that gives you a false impression of, freedom even. But when you're in concavity, you can see the eyes looking down at you. You know what I mean? No.
I'm not sure if I caught that last part, but I like the Petri dish analogy a whole lot. That works very well.
The Petri dish with the Antarctica around it.
Yeah.
And then all these experiments that are all tied together. I mean, the assault is multi-pronged, as I've said before, but, all these experiments are dovetailing now. They're pushing our biology, shifting us, making us go from organic, carbon-based, oxygen-breathing life into stresses that we can't tolerate these stresses, and there are so many of them on us, that we're going to have to adapt. And my sense is we are being experimented on. There's a systematic process that is being levied on us, and we're contained.
Yeah. One thing that I don't know what the words are, but we really have to start changing our vocabulary. I believe very strongly in that angle. In fact, I have stayed away from using the word kid for years. It slips out here and there, but kid, I think that's part of mocking us as being a baby goat. So I say children, my child, things like that. I don't say kids. And this whole idea of globalism, we can't use that term anymore, because all we're doing is helping reinforce that fraud. That we've got to come up with our own new terms that are reasonable and stick, so we can communicate these without pushing their agenda in any way. And there was back in, I guess it's, let me see here, a March issue. I never buy it, and I hate paying money to them to do so, but National Geographic. I saw it on the shelf at the grocery store, and the big title on it is The War on Science. And on the cover, they show a guy setting up a little astronaut dummy with, next to a ladder and a flag, so he's kind of like staging some scene. And so, of course, I'm sure most anybody listening to this, except for some that I might send it to, I bet a lot of them will be very aware of the very obvious fraud of the moon landing. But I started flipping through this little magazine and seeing these different topics that they cover, and sure enough, they had a flat Earth one in there. And 2015 to me seems like the year of the awakening for the flat Earth. It was about 2005, I believe, in 2006 in that area, that 9/11 conspiracy, became such a huge topic, kind of overnight, just exponentially grew. And this year has been just big on that. When I saw that flat Earth and the National Geographic amongst all the other very, very clear hoaxes, that even convinced me all the more. I'm like, hey, if they're here trying to cover up right now, we are definitely onto something.
Sophia, I have a question for you. this flat Earth thing has really taken off in the last few months. Just this year, last year I don't think anybody was talking about it. Why do you think that is? Why is it all of a sudden? Because that's the biggest opposition. People are like, "This is a psyop," because it came out of nowhere. What is your take on that?
Well, it could be that as people awaken in general, to different things like 9/11, chemtrails, money, et cetera, vaccines, they're going to find this. And this was timed so that because it's it might be the biggest one of all, it will also make us look the craziest of all. And it will effectively just take the wind out of our sails if we come out in support of the flat Earth. We will be so ridiculed. It will be so gargantuan. It will be such a bad move on the reputation chessboard. So it could have been withheld and then given some momentum, so that when open-minded researchers really looked into it and saw that, the perspective line always comes up to eye level. I mean, artists have drawn that. They've drawn it for as long as they've painted, In fact, when you see a painting and it has bad perspective lines in it, there's something really wrong. You don't even want to look at it. So I think that this could have all been timed to make those who come out in favor of it lose credibility altogether.
Wow.
I've asked quite a lot of people, people that I really respect and have got to know over the last few years, and 99% of them, when I've asked, flat Earth, is it a psyop? They said yes. Every single one of them, practically. I think people find it very, very, very difficult to come to terms with this particular conversation. And even though I speak to you guys and you're very convincing, I'm still sitting on the fence. I'm still 50-50. I just don't know. I need some hard proof.
Is it that the timing of it is a psyop? Because the evidence is undeniable at this point.
It has
we have to ask you what you want in the way of proof. What do you want?
Well,
I don't know. I personally, I want to fly over. I want to go beyond. I want to go to the next pond, the next puddle. I want to go and meet the people over beyond Antarctica. I want to go and see what is. I need to see it with my own eyes, I think.
Well, how about, I think that you're an intelligent guy, clearly, even though it's the first time we've spoken. I think you can do it from your desk as far as finding out so much. Take the data they provide you. Take what NASA provides. Take their figures. Start doing the math. Start looking at the lunar cycles and stuff. And you will see that none of it adds up. And when you start to see that none of their alleged science adds up, that right there should be a telltale sign that, hey, something is really wrong. If it was right, if it was a ball Earth, this math would add up. They would give us the right figures. None of it does. I mean, just go look at, the midnight sun that goes on. And there's places where you should never, ever, ever see the sun 24 hours a day, but you do.
Listen, he doesn't want to do it like that. He doesn't want to do math. He doesn't want to look at numbers. He wants the, Thor Heyerdahl adventure. He wants to get in his raft and go over the ice fence and fly over Antarctica. Okay, so let me ask you this, English David. What if you got over that ice fence, the ice hills, the ice mountains, and then the dimensions changed? You weren't in the third dimensional world anymore. And your body couldn't take it, and your mind couldn't take it, and it freaked you out forever, and you didn't even know what you were seeing because you were so out of your zone of experience. Then what would you do?
Well, that's a very good question. So I'd probably do what I'm doing now, because Greg's right. NASA is full of something that we're not going to speak of on this podcast, and I'm bewildered. So I would imagine that if that happened, Sophia, I would again feel very, very bewildered. But life is stranger than fiction right now. It really is. You know, truth is stranger than fiction. You guys are twisting my melon, and I just don't know what to think. I really don't.
One other idea is if you were to do something as an adventure in a boat, take a flat earth map, go out to a point in the ocean where you could traverse around and follow it as if it were a flat earth map. So if you're going along a certain parallel or latitude there, hug along that exact line, stay within that exact line, and see where you end up. And you will end up just where the flat earth map takes you. If you use a ball earth map to navigate, well, you're going to see the same problems that tons of ships that have wrecked did, is that they end up way, way out of reckoning every single day. Within less than a day, they're many miles out of reckoning. I mean, you could test it that way, where you could physically get out in a boat and do it.
Well, clearly there's got to be someone with enough money who's willing to sponsor an activity of that kind. There's got to be someone out there who's fascinated with this topic, I would have thought.
But as we've discussed, it's not allowed. You could have $1 billion, and if you're not part of their clique, you are not going there. You're going to be fought off at gunpoint, maybe with some sort of a warship. You're going to be fined. You're going to be jailed. It won't ever happen. And if you can just imagine, even from what we can see, even from the photos we see of that ice wall, I can't even fathom what it would be like. The conditions, just the bitter cold and trying to bring food with you and everything. I mean, and I think that they limit that. I don't even think you're even allowed to bring many supplies anywhere near the region.
Right. You're not allowed, as I said earlier, you're not allowed to store fuel anywhere near Antarctica because they don't want anybody refueling and making it over the wall.
So, David, you're 99%, okay? What would push you onto the 100% mark?
You know, I'm still looking for proof that the Earth is a ball, and I cannot find any. So I'm lying about the 99%, but I'm just going to keep saying I'm 99%. And I think you're lying about the 50%, because if I offered you $1 million right now for the right answer, I know the answer. What are you going to pick it, and I'll give you $1 million. What are you going to say, flat or round?
That's outrageous. You can't ask me something like that.
I'm going to give you $1 million. I know the answer. They just told me. You know, my controllers just told me, and I can give you $1 million if you guess it right now. What are you going to guess?
I don't think you're going to give me $1 million. That's what I guess. No, if after this conversation, I would be certainly 70-30 pro flat Earth. You guys are incredibly convincing, but when I step back into the real world, when I step back into the conversation and I look at my son and my daughter and I talk to my mates and I think, it can't be, can it? They can't have pulled the wool over our eyes that much, can they?
Listen, I just told somebody, a very normal mainstream person in the last couple of days, that I was doing a radio show and we were going to discuss the possibilities that the Earth was flat. And I gave him just one or two quick little examples of why it might be. And he looked at me and he said, I disagree with you. And I thought, I said to him, you can't, because you don't have anything to go by. He hasn't looked at any videos, nothing. I mean, when I hadn't looked at videos, I listened to one podcast by somebody else, and it was very unconvincing because the people were not articulate. And I was not impressed by the way they were arguing. This was a couple of years ago, and I just thought, that is so stupid. These guys are oafs. And so I shut the whole thing down in my head. And it was only when Greg, who is not a stupid guy, who is very articulate, he mentioned it to me a couple of months ago, and I said, what? And he said, no, really, Sophia. And then he started explaining. It was on the phone, and I listened. I said, all right, send me a couple of YouTubes. And I watched them, and I thought, wow, this horizon thing is good, this perspective. It really is, because I trained as a fine artist. I had to learn to draw perspectival lines correctly. So that That I could understand, but I couldn't understand the seasons. So I asked American David to explain that, and I couldn't grasp what it was. So I decided, I don't know. The perspective thing works, but the other stuff doesn't. So I think you just have to go through your own immersion, and you have to see logical demonstration after logical demonstration. And you have your own eyes. And I agree. I live on the ocean, essentially. I'm a couple of miles from it. And I go to the beach, and I look at this expanse of horizon. And most of it is flat, except on the two sides. As English David said, it starts to curve toward you. But that is because you're like in the center of a string, and your visual line out is that string. So it's going to curve a little bit on the sides because you're standing in a circle looking around you, you know. So now that makes sense to me.
Can I just ask a quick question to all three of you, because we all come from relatively artistic backgrounds, I do believe. Do you think this is a right side, left side brain thing?
I wish I had a better understanding of the brain. I'm still baffled that after my years of trying to share things with people, and I thought the chemtrail thing would be easy because it's right in front of our face. And in the Houston area, and I know many other places, it has been extremely heavy spraying day after day after day for years. And I thought for sure they're going to see something's wrong with it. But the propaganda, the programming has been so extremely powerful. I don't understand how the brain works. I think that there must be a part to it, like you said, the right-left side of the brain. I think that probably you have maybe be just naturally a little bit more creative, even though I don't think you have to be creative to see the truth. I think it helps.
Well, I'd like to give the example of what happens in the eye, that you actually see everything upside down, but your brain makes it right side up. So that's how effective the brain is at its job. The brain's job is to make things make sense for you so you don't lose your bearings. And that's why when we're programmed so systematically, we're conditioned. Our parents are conditioned. Then they condition us. Then they enroll us in state-run schools. And we go to expensive universities that are all conditioning programs. And then we've got so much money invested in our conditioning that we have to earn it back through our job, which is working and serving the conditioning system for most people.
So true.
Well, that's right. It feels very authentic, doesn't it? That statement. I've always questioned schooling, the education process, 9 to 5. That jobbing thing. You guys have probably been to London. You get on the tube. Everyone looks the same. They're going in one direction. They get off. They go into the office. They come out of the office. It's a real matrix scenario. And then back again. You fall asleep, and it's a complete rotation of services, energy, and it's all to fuel the monster. And at the end of the day, we get paid some paper, which is a promissory note, to say thank you very much for your time and go and buy our products. It's an incredible mechanism, and seeing that and just articulating it, of course, what we're living on is prefabricated, because everything's prefabricated, isn't it? I mean, the pictures of on the cinema. The music that we get now, there's no real music that's pumped out of radio stations, and so I'm starting to question everything. So I might as well join you guys and question this as well. It seems to be the way, but it's incredibly scary. It really is. From my perspective, it's incredibly scary.
It's very unsettling. I agree. It makes you really worry about how big of a fool have I really been, and if this is also something that in real three-dimensional physics, I mean, again, I believe that this three-dimensional world is kind of a mass consciousness agreement, But it's, for all intents and purposes, we all are in it and we use it and we work within it, and it works for us in this mass agreement we've made.
Sophia, you mentioned these various dimensions, and you asked me, how I would feel. I went to see the film Interstellar, and clearly they were talking about the various dimensions. But could you just talk about that a little bit more? And what would happen, do you think, if you went over the Antarctic wall?
I have no idea. I can't even begin to conceive of what would happen. First of all, I don't know how I would get there in physical terms. In physical life, how they make it impossible for you to go there. So you would have to go there some other way. And I don't know how to do that. But I can't imagine, honestly. I'm sorry that I have no answer for that. But, it's like asking somebody, what happens when you die? Where do you go? And some people will tell you nowhere. You go in the earth and that's it. And other people tell you go to heaven, and other people tell you go through a tunnel and there's light and all your relatives are on the other side and angels and you're welcomed by God and all is forgiven. I don't know. I have no idea. Then you're supposed to come back again. I mean, at this point, with the world getting as screwy as it is, I do not want to be reincarnated.
My idea of there being multiple puddles, spread across the vast earth, makes a lot of sense to me because, and let's just say that, this is the only one that's inhabited, but if the earth goes on beyond the ice walls, and it would explain why the elite, the ones in the know, are just destroying this earth, chemtrails and fracking and, polluting, and they don't care because they have other places to go and they're keeping it for themselves, and they're stealing, brain power and moving them there and having their paradise that we just don't have access to. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and up until not long ago, a lot of people have mentioned something like that, but they were thinking in terms of, they're going to go to Mars or some other planet, some terra firma that they can go to, but clearly that's not the case. So let me interject here one thing for anybody that is new to this, listening to this podcast, that as people often warn, there are groups like the Flat Earth Society has existed for some decades, but there's this term controlled opposition, meaning that it is somebody that plays the role of, say like the Flat Earth Society on face value, just simply from their name, that they support the idea of the flat Earth. But then if you look into it, they just make a mockery of it all. There was the guy, I guess Ferrari or something like that was his name, that would go on to talk shows and stuff and bring this big rock with him, saying that he brought this back from the edge of the earth and it saved him because he held onto it and grabbed back up. There are a lot of people out there playing a role to cover this up. So please, if you come across some stuff that you're searching on the web, or even if there's things within our conversation today that you don't agree with, that there is so much data out there that you can review for yourself, and of course the empirical data, just everything you can see with your own eyes. But don't be discouraged and turned off by it if you come across some YouTubes or some articles that just sound completely fanciful. But then again, I think the idea in itself, just if you're new to it, will sound fanciful, but give it a few moments. Just go look around if you're in a big city at buildings from far away, and I think you'll be very intrigued. And I think if we're going to look on the positive side of all of this stuff, of digging down the rabbit hole, is it is fascinating, it is interesting, it does stimulate your brain, and we all get enjoyment out of that. And there is so much power in intelligence. Like with this whole Jade Helm thing coming around, and me seeing military trucks nearby, and wondering what's up with that, if they really could take over Texas or whatnot. People are saying, I just want to add this one thing, and so they say that don't worry, Greg, they're going to be going after ex-military with guns and stuff. No, I think they're more afraid of the intellectuals, because it's intelligence, it's thoughts and ideas that bring change.
I wanted to say that in this concept of the petri dish, or the whatever it is, the circumscribed terrain with the ice around it, just how thick is that terrain? And so, I like to exercise my imagination. So while you guys were talking, I was thinking, what if inside the terrain are the elements of the periodic table in supply, and they combine, and the exterior of the surface is the recombined different versions of those elements. And I'm looking into primary water. I've put some things on my blog, Smallstorm blog, on the About the Sky website. And primary water is the real water. It is formed at very high pressure underground, I'll just say, deep underground, and oxygen and hydrogen combine and they create this water, and it's always renewed. And this secondary rain cycle, evaporation rain, that everybody's bickering over and freaking out about, is secondary water, and that is not what has supplied the oceans. The oceans were supplied by water combining from hydrogen and oxygen underground, and there's loads of water on this planet. So what if there's all the elements are under there and they're all combining in different ways, but we started out with this set, this periodic table, 92 or whatever it is, and now they're adding other things, unnatural compounds that don't form the way that the 92 combined. I hope it's 92, I think it is. And that's what the chemtrails are. That's what the GMOs are. That they want to just see how they can shift this life form, these life forms, into tolerance of these other combinations from this other palette. So I just want to know how thick this thing is that we're on.
Maybe what we're on is floating in water, on the primary water system, and that's where the pressure comes from. I mean, it could be anything. I just want to point out, we were talking about planets a second ago. One of the biggest arguments is, hey, I see all these other planets, they're all spheres. Why would the Earth be flat? And my answer, I've looked through some high-powered telescopes, and they sure look like spheres to me. They could be round and flat, but I actually believe that they're spheres. They're planets. The Earth is not a planet in my mind. Planets are planets, and the Earth is the Earth. And that's if you can wrap your head around that, it kind of makes this make a lot more sense.
Well, I think planets actually, they used to be known as wandering stars. I believe they are stars. I don't think they are terra firma that anybody could go stand on. Even
Correct.
with our best telescopes that we see, they really look just like a light source. They don't appear to me. Then again, I haven't looked personally, and what I've seen online, I'd have to look back at it. But from what I remember, they look more like a star.
Right. When I looked at Saturn, it was lit up. It looked like it was lit internally. I just took a photograph of the moon last night. We had a full moon, and we finally had a clear sky. And there's no shadowing along the edge of the moon. It's equal lighting. It's not a sphere. Whatever it is, whether it's bleeding through from another dimension, whether it's physical or not, I don't know. But it's not a big rock reflecting the sunlight.
Yeah, in fact, the light is different. That supposedly, and another thing I haven't tested, but supposedly that the moonlight, it's a different temperature. And as I've heard Eric Dubé say, that if you're out in the moonlight and then you go in the shadows, that it'll be actually, warmer in the shadows under moonlight.
I've done that, and I've noticed it, and I always thought it was weird, but I thought the tree was keeping the heat in, insulating the heat. I never really thought about it. Somebody just did a test. I think it's a YouTuber named Mr. Thrive and Survive or something like that, where he put a wallet out in the moonlight, half in the moonlight, half not, and had a laser temperature tester, and it was like a 4 or 5 degree difference. Warmer in the shade than it was in the moonlight.
Mm-hmm. And I work with video and whatnot in different lights, and the color temperature just is clearly different from them. It's not a reflected light from the sun. Right. And then you see these anomalies and things where you see the moon lit fully in the daytime when the sun is actually in another location to where you shouldn't be seeing it like that. And I'm just wondering with the chemtrails, although there are probably many, many, many reasons they do it, I've had to start wondering if part of it could be to muddy up the sky so that now that people are looking, that they can't see so well.
And also the full moon and the crescent moon, I never bought that the Earth's shadow could make such a clean circle and give you a crescent. And then the full moon is so big. I mean, it just looks completely out of proportion. Whatever is shadowing the other half of it is not shaped differently, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and according to NASA and so forth, every 6 months that crescent moon would be flipped to the other side. But you're not seeing these things.
Right.
Like, yeah, so every 6 months a new and full moon should switch, but they don't. And it's just back to the whole idea of gravity and stuff, just the basics of a ball Earth. If you start to really think about it, there's nothing else in nature where you could have something just magically stuck to the bottom. But they want us to believe that people are on one side of the Earth just through this magic of gravity holding on, and that water reacts differently when the ball is big enough. So they want us to believe, it's a silly hypothetical maybe, but if we could come up with some ball to inflate to just astronomical proportions and put it next to the Earth, is there some size that ball will reach to where if we pour water on it, it's not going to act like we see water everywhere else to flatten out and it's going to stick to the ball? No, it's going to run off of it.
Well, I don't know. I think we have lots of questions, and we've been on now for about 2 hours, so this is a long show. So perhaps we should call it a day.
Sure. Can I just, if anyone that wants to hear more about the flat Earth, I do a weekly show on Wednesday mornings called The Ball Earth Skeptic. It's just on YouTube. There's a live chat if you want to listen, ask questions. It's 8 a.m. Eastern Time, USA. And it also, there's an archive on the Ball Earth Skeptic YouTube channel. We've done 4 shows, and we have some interesting guests on, and it's continuing the discussion just like this.
Well, that's nice.
I've listened to it. I think it's great.
I look forward to hearing it.
All right, well, everyone, I'm going to put up a bunch of links with the description of this show, and you can look at some of these things and see how convincing they are or not, and start bending your own mind toward this, or securing it away from this, which is entirely your prerogative. And I don't want to have anybody as upset as poor English David has been by all this.
I think you've ruined me, all 3 of you.
Dave's 100% now, by the way. I just want to point that out there. He's not going to admit it.
No.
Where's my million?
Yeah, I'm back to 50% here, Dave. Where's my incentive?
Listen, as I say, if you don't like this topic, you can take your ball Earth and go home.
Great stuff. Thanks,
all right,
Sophia.
well, thank you guys.
Thank you all. Great to talk with you all. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Sophia.
And you, Greg. Cheers, David.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.